The Empire's arrival. The sun set over Earth, casting a warm glow across the planet's surface. People were going about their daily routines, unaware of the dark shadow about to fall on their world. The year was 2045, and the Earth was still recovering from years of political chaos and environmental disasters. Little did anyone know, the greatest threat humanity had ever faced was about to make its move. Far above the clouds, in the cold vacuum of space, a massive alien fleet approached. The ships were unlike anything seen before. Sleek, dark, and enormous, they moved silently through space, their engines humming with power. At the forefront of the fleet was a ship so large, it seemed to swallow up the stars around it. The alien species that piloted these ships were called the Vora'an, a race known across the galaxy for their brutality and advanced technology. The Vora'an had conquered many worlds before, and they believed that Earth would be no different. As the fleet drew closer, Earth's satellites began to detect the incoming ships. At first, the signals were dismissed as a mistake, some random space debris or anomaly. But the signals grew stronger, more defined. Soon, scientists and military leaders around the world were scrambling to understand what was happening. The world's space agencies worked overtime, trying to track the objects in the sky. But it was clear that something was wrong. The ships were massive and they were headed straight for Earth. The first warning came in the form of a strange signal, a deep resonant hum that filled the airwaves. No one knew what it meant. It was not like anything Earth's technology could produce. It was alien, unsettling, and it sent chills down the spines of those who heard it. Panic started to spread across the globe as the realization set in. Earth was not alone in the universe, and the visitors were not friendly. The Vora'an didn't communicate through typical means. They didn't send messages or make demands. Instead, they simply arrived, their fleet filling the skies. Earth's military forces scrambled to prepare for the worst. Fighter jets were launched, missiles locked onto the approaching ships, and defense systems were activated. But despite their best efforts, they were no match for the alien technology. When the Vora'an fleet finally entered Earth's atmosphere, they made no attempt to hide their intentions. Massive ships hovered above cities, casting long, dark shadows over the ground. People below looked up in awe and terror as they realized that their worst fears were true. The invaders were here, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop them. The world watched in silence as the alien ships began to deploy their forces. Robots, alien soldiers, and flying machines descended to the surface, landing in key locations. In a single motion, the Vora'an took control of major cities across the globe. Governments fell, armies were wiped out, and the Earth's defenses crumbled under the overwhelming force. It was clear that the Vora'an had no intention of negotiating. They were here to conquer. For the first time in history, humanity faced an enemy that was far beyond anything they had ever imagined. The Earth's strongest weapons, nuclear missiles, advanced fighter jets, and laser defense systems, were powerless against the alien forces. The Vora'an laughed as Earth's military tried to retaliate, effortlessly dodging every attack and wiping out entire battalions with a single strike. In the midst of this chaos, a small group of scientists and military leaders met in secret. They had no real plan, only the slim hope that somehow, some way, they could fight back. As they huddled together in the shadows, the world outside burned. People hid in fear, watching the skies as their cities were destroyed. But there was one thing that kept them going: hope. There was still a chance, they thought. Maybe humanity wasn't finished yet, but the Vora'an were not interested in giving Earth a chance. Their message was simple, delivered through a booming voice from the skies: surrender now or face extinction. The people of Earth were on the brink of despair. Their world was being torn apart, and the future seemed bleak. But among the rubble and destruction, something unexpected began to happen. Not all of humanity bowed down to the alien invaders. Small pockets of resistance began to form, each group determined to fight for survival. They didn't know if they could win, but they knew one thing for sure: they would not surrender without a fight. As the Vora'an watched from above, they couldn't help but be surprised. Humanity, they had thought, would fall easily. But as Earth survivors fought back in their own way, the Voron realized they were facing something different. Humanity wasn't ready to die. Not yet. The first part of the battle had been won by the Voron, but Earth's spirit was far from broken. The story of humanity's struggle had only just begun, and the Empire? They may have thought they had won, but what they didn't know was that their victory was far from certain. Earth was about to show them that it would fight to the last breath. True battle had only just begun. The Empire had arrived, but humanity wasn't ready to give up. While the Voron fleet hovered above Earth, their massive ships casting shadows over entire cities, something unexpected was stirring among the people. The world, although in chaos, had not lost all hope. The small pockets of resistance began to grow, and those who had once doubted the power of humanity's will now realized that they were not alone in their fight. In hidden laboratories and secret military bunkers, a group of brilliant scientists and military leaders came together. They knew the odds were against them, but they also knew that if they didn't act fast, Earth would fall forever. Among them was Dr. Mira Johnson, a scientist known for her groundbreaking work in energy technology. She had been studying the alien technology that had arrived with the Voron, and something in their design caught her attention. The energy source that powered their ships was unlike anything Earth had seen before, and it held the key to possibly turning the tide. Dr. Johnson, along with a small team of engineers and soldiers, began working tirelessly to understand the alien technology. They knew they didn't have much time. The Voron were advancing quickly, and every hour brought the planet closer to total domination. But there was a glimmer of hope. They had discovered that the same technology powering the Voron ships could be used to create a defense strong enough to challenge them. However, the process was not easy. The technology was complex, and their resources were limited. Earth's best engineers worked day and night to build prototypes of a new weapon. Each failure brought them closer to their goal, but the pressure was immense. As the Voron continued their conquest, the group of survivors raced against time, working together with determination that hadn't been seen since humanity's darkest days. Meanwhile, the rest of the world tried to adjust to the new reality. Governments had fallen, and cities were being destroyed. But even as the world crumbled, the spirit of resistance burned brighter. In every corner of the globe, ordinary people stood up, refusing to give in. It wasn't just the military that fought back. It was farmers, teachers, doctors, students. All were united by a single purpose: to reclaim their home. In every major city, small groups of fighters used guerrilla tactics to disrupt the Voron forces. They didn't have advanced weapons or technology, but what they lacked in power, they made up for with courage and determination. They sabotaged supply lines, destroyed alien outposts, and provided the resistance with valuable intelligence. They were becoming a thorn in the side of the Empire, showing the invaders that Earth wasn't ready to be conquered so easily. Back in the secret underground base, Dr. Johnson's team had made a breakthrough. They had successfully replicated a small piece of the alien energy technology and created a device capable of disrupting the Voron's communication systems. It was a risky move, and there was no guarantee it would work, but it was the only chance they had. The team worked quickly, knowing that if they didn't act soon, the Empire would crush the last remnants of humanity's hope. Dr. Johnson stood in front of the control panel, staring at the device in her hands. "This is it," she said, her voice steady but filled with urgency. "If we can get this into the Voron command center, we might just have a shot at turning the tide." The team exchanged nervous glances. The task was dangerous, and the odds were stacked against them. The Voron were not easily fooled, and the risks of getting caught were high. But if they didn't try, Earth's future was all but sealed. The group made their way to the edge of the city, where the Voron command center was located. As they neared the heart of the alien forces, they moved carefully, staying out of sight. Every step was a risk, but they pushed forward with the hope that this small act of defiance would be enough to change the course of history. When they finally reached the command center, they placed the device in a hidden location within the alien communications network. The countdown began. The device would send out a powerful electromagnetic pulse, disrupting the Vorayans' ability to communicate with their fleet. The tension was unbearable. The group waited in silence, watching as the seconds ticked away. Then, the device activated. A wave of energy rippled through the air, and the Vorayan communication systems went dark. For the first time since their arrival, the invaders were thrown into confusion. Their command center was paralyzed, and their fleet, once unstoppable, was now vulnerable. The humans had done it. They had struck the first blow. However, this was only the beginning. The Vorayan, although disoriented, quickly regrouped and began their retaliation. They weren't used to being outsmarted, and their anger was only growing. But in that moment, humanity had proven that it would not be conquered. The Empire may have attacked first, but Earth had given them a taste of what was to come. As Dr. Johnson and her team retreated to safety, they knew that this victory was only the beginning. The battle for Earth was far from over, but they had sent a powerful message. Humanity wasn't finished yet. The fight had just begun. The world had changed. What had once seemed impossible now felt like humanity's only chance for survival. The Vorayan, though shaken by the unexpected disruption to their communication systems, were not easily defeated. Their commanders quickly adjusted, and they began organizing a counter-strategy that would bring even more advanced forces to bear on Earth. The victory humanity had just claimed felt small in comparison to the overwhelming might of the Empire, but it was enough to spark a renewed sense of hope. The people of Earth had shown that they could fight back, and for the first time since the invasion began, the Vorayan were uncertain. Dr. Mira Johnson and her team, still reeling from their success, knew that the Vorayan would come at them with everything they had. They had one small victory, but the road ahead was long and dangerous. The alien forces would learn from their mistakes, and Earth would need more than just one successful strike to stand a chance. Yet the victory had a silver lining. It had given humanity something vital: time. Time to prepare, time to regroup, and time to plan for the next phase of the resistance. Across the globe, humanity rallied in ways no one could have predicted. The resistance forces, which had once been small, scattered groups, began to organize. Communication lines were set up across continents, with people sharing information and coordinating efforts in ways that defied the limitations of their technology. Every corner of the world had become a battleground, not in the traditional sense of wars fought with weapons and armies, but in a more subtle, strategic way. People used their knowledge of the land, their resourcefulness, and their ingenuity to strike back. From farmers in the fields to office workers in the cities, everyone was involved. The Vorayan had underestimated humanity's resilience, and now they were beginning to feel the consequences. Meanwhile, the world's remaining scientists and engineers worked tirelessly on the alien technology they had captured. With Dr. Johnson leading the charge, they continued to study the energy sources that powered the Vorayan's massive ships. But now they faced a new challenge: how to turn the technology against its creators. It was one thing to disrupt communications. It was another thing entirely to create a weapon capable of standing toe-to-toe with the Empire's overwhelming firepower. Dr. Johnson was working around the clock, her mind racing with possibilities. She had already discovered that the Vorayan used a highly advanced form of energy, one that was both highly efficient and extremely destructive. To use it against them, they would need to replicate the power source, but on a smaller scale. This was a difficult task, one that many thought impossible. The Vorayan had mastered the science behind it for centuries, and Earth was just beginning to understand it. But where there was a will, there was a way. Dr. Johnson's team had the determination, and that in itself was powerful. As the weeks passed, the Vorayan forces began to intensify their operations. They were not just hunting down resistance fighters, they were systematically dismantling Earth's infrastructure. Large portions of the world's cities were abandoned as the invaders took control, creating zones where only their forces were allowed to operate. Yet despite their might, they could not eradicate the resistance. In fact, the harder they pushed, the stronger the resistance seemed to grow. In every major city, small acts of defiance began to pile up. In the industrial zones, workers had managed to sabotage important machinery, delaying the Empire's progress. In rural areas, people hid weapons and supplies ready to strike at a moment's notice. And even in the cities under direct Voran control, resistance cells formed in the shadows, spreading messages of hope and encouragement to those still trapped beneath the alien yoke. One day, a breakthrough came. Dr. Johnson and her team successfully managed to create a prototype weapon that could harness the Voron's energy source and use it against them. It was a small device, untested and fragile, but it was a symbol of hope. The weapon, while far from perfect, had the potential to bring down an entire fleet if it could be properly deployed. The problem was that they didn't have the resources to build more. This was humanity's last chance. Dr. Johnson knew the next move would be the most dangerous one yet. The Voron had begun to regroup, and their forces were becoming more organized. The device had to be used at the right moment, when the aliens' command was most vulnerable. They needed to hit hard and fast, with precision, before the Voron could adapt again. The resistance leaders convened in secret, discussing their options. The weapon was their greatest hope, but they needed a way to deliver it to the heart of the Voron operation. There was no direct assault that could work. The alien forces were too powerful, too advanced. But there was a possibility. A small, highly trained group could infiltrate one of the Voron-controlled areas and plant the device at the core of their command structure. The plan was risky, with very little chance of success. The Voron had every major city under close surveillance, and their defenses were becoming tighter by the day. But for the first time in weeks, Dr. Johnson felt a spark of optimism. The fight was far from over. The Empire had thought it could crush humanity, but it was beginning to realize that this small planet, with its unpredictable inhabitants, was not so easily defeated. As the days ticked by, the resistance forces prepared for the next step. They would use their knowledge of the terrain and their guerrilla tactics to outsmart the Voron. It was a battle of wits as much as it was of strength. The Voron might have superior technology, but humanity had something more important: a relentless will to survive. They would not go down without a fight. And as the resistance gathered their forces, it became clear that the Empire's victory was not as certain as they had once believed. The days were growing shorter, and the air was thick with anticipation. The Voron, having regained their footing, were now preparing for the final phase of their conquest. Their forces, while not invincible, were unmatched in strength, and they believed that the last pockets of resistance would soon crumble under their might. But they had underestimated something far more dangerous than their weapons: the resolve of humanity. In the heart of the resistance, a plan was being set into motion. The prototype weapon Dr. Johnson's team had developed was ready, but they still needed a way to deliver it to the very heart of the Voron command structure. The Voron were no longer operating openly. They had become more strategic, more elusive, and they were using their advanced surveillance systems to monitor everything. It would take more than technology to outsmart them. It would take ingenuity and courage. The resistance decided to focus on something the Voron had not fully anticipated: Earth's natural landscapes. While the invaders controlled the major cities, the wilderness, mountains, and forests remained largely untouched. These areas became the resistance's greatest advantage. They could move unseen, using Earth's terrain as a shield. The Voron had no experience with the forests and mountains of Earth, and that was where humanity would strike. Groups of resistance fighters, small and nimble, began to move across the country, gathering intelligence, sabotaging communication lines, and laying the groundwork for the final push. It was a slow process, but every small victory added to the growing hope. People who had once been isolated began to form connections, working together in ways they never thought possible. While the resistance fought to regain their freedom in small ways, Dr. Johnson and her team worked on perfecting the device. They realized that simply having a weapon would not be enough. They needed to understand how to activate it at the right moment. The Voron had their own energy shield system, a defense that had previously proven impossible to breach. If they couldn't figure out how to disable that, the weapon would be useless. It was a race against time. For weeks, Dr. Johnson and her engineers worked without rest, testing different strategies, trying to replicate the Voron's energy shield technology. They had access to pieces of the aliens' ships, but it was like trying to understand an entirely new form of science. It was frustrating and exhausting. There were times when the team felt as though they were fighting against an invisible force. Every step forward seemed to lead to 2 steps backward. But Dr. Johnson refused to give up. She knew that the future of Earth rested on their success. Then one evening, after what felt like the 100th failed attempt, something clicked. Dr. Johnson had been studying the power core of the Voron ships again, trying to identify a flaw in the way their shields were powered. This time, as she reviewed the data, she realized that the energy signature from the Voron's shields had an oscillation pattern. If they could disrupt that pattern, it could cause the shields to fail, even temporarily. It wasn't a permanent solution, but it could be enough to allow the weapon to get through. The breakthrough was like a light in the dark. The team rallied around the discovery, working with renewed determination to refine the weapon. But even as they celebrated their progress, they knew that the true test lay ahead. They had only one chance. If the Voron realized what was happening before it was too late, Earth would be lost. A plan began to take shape. A small group of resistance fighters, some of the best and most experienced, would infiltrate the Voron's central command center, which was located deep within one of the occupied cities. The mission was straightforward: plant the weapon, trigger the energy disruption, and get out. It was a dangerous task, and they would have to move quickly and quietly. Any mistake could mean disaster. The group chosen for the mission was a diverse one. There was Captain Amir, a former military strategist known for his calm under pressure. His ability to think several steps ahead made him the ideal leader for the operation. Then there was Lieutenant Elena, a tech expert who had spent years studying the Voron's digital systems. Her knowledge of alien technology would be crucial in disabling the communication systems during the mission. Finally, there was Maya, a scout who knew the city's streets better than anyone. Her skills in navigating complex urban environments would help the group move undetected. The team set out under the cover of night. They knew the risks, but they also knew they couldn't afford to fail. The resistance had come too far to back down now. They moved in silence, slipping through the shadows as they neared the outskirts of the city. The Voron had set up barriers, but they weren't designed to block those who knew the terrain as well as the resistance did. The team advanced steadily, always staying a step ahead of the enemy. As they neared the command center, the tension in the air was palpable. They could see the alien forces guarding the area, their strange, glowing eyes scanning the surroundings. It was a delicate balance. Too many movements, too much noise, and they would be discovered. But the team held their ground, moving in, sync, using the buildings and alleys to stay hidden. At the heart of the command center, the device had to be planted in a central hub where the energy grid could be accessed. Maya led the way, knowing exactly where to go. Elena worked quickly, hacking into the Vorian systems to disable their defenses and create an opening for the device. Captain Amir kept watch, his eyes darting around for any sign of danger. The clock was ticking. Finally, the moment arrived. The device was in place, ready to unleash its disruptive wave. The team knew the countdown had begun. They didn't have much time. They had to move fast. As the device activated, a strange hum filled the air. For a split second, everything seemed to freeze. Then, without warning, the Voron communication systems went dark. Their energy shields flickered, and for the first time, the invaders were vulnerable. The mission was a success, at least for the moment. The team made their way back through the city, their hearts pounding with each step. They knew the Voron would quickly respond, but they had bought Earth a valuable window of opportunity. It was now up to the rest of humanity to take full advantage of it. As the team escaped into the night, they knew one thing for certain. The Empire had underestimated Earth. They had thought the planet would fall easily, but they had no idea what humanity was capable of when cornered. The battle was far from over, but humanity's chances had just improved, and the Voron were starting to realize that they had awakened a force they couldn't ignore. The world was holding its breath. As the weeks passed since the infiltration mission, the Resistance had gained something invaluable: hope. It wasn't just the successful sabotage of the Voron energy systems, it was the message it sent. Humanity had found a way to fight back. The planet had not crumbled under the might of the Empire. No, it had learned, adapted, and now it was preparing for its greatest challenge yet. The Voron had underestimated Earth's resilience, and they were beginning to feel the consequences of that mistake. The Resistance forces had been scattered at first, a loose network of individuals fighting for survival, but now they were united. The victory of disrupting the Voron's power grid had sparked a surge of new recruits eager to join the cause. People from every corner of the world, from all walks of life, were contributing in whatever way they could. It wasn't just soldiers and scientists anymore. Artists, teachers, farmers, doctors, every person had a role to play, and each act, no matter how small, contributed to the growing strength of the Resistance. One of the most significant changes had been in the way people thought about the war. At first, many had believed that their only hope lay in defeating the Voron's technological superiority. But now, they understood something deeper. The true strength of humanity wasn't just in its ability to build and innovate. It was in its spirit, its ability to endure and adapt. The Voron might have better weapons, better ships, but humanity had something that the Empire would never understand: unity. Dr. Johnson and her team had not rested since the disruption of the energy systems. They knew that the success of their mission was only temporary. The Voron were not easily deterred, and their response would be swift. But the scientists had made another critical discovery. The aliens were planning a massive offensive to retake Earth, an attack that would likely crush any resistance in its path. The weapon that had been developed was only the first step. To truly have a chance at winning, humanity would need to launch a full-scale counteroffensive. The world's leaders, once fragmented and isolated by the chaos of the invasion, had now come together in an unprecedented way. Through the channels set up by the Resistance, the leaders were communicating and coordinating their efforts. They were pooling resources, sharing information, and strategizing for the final battle. The Voron had their fleets, their advanced technologies, but humanity had something else: the power of collaboration. Still, the road ahead was uncertain. While the Resistance had gained valuable time, they knew the Voron would not wait forever. The Empire's forces were vast and relentless, and they were determined to crush humanity's spirit once and for all. The battle for Earth was about to escalate, and every move, every decision, would determine the future of the planet. Dr. Johnson's team had been working tirelessly to refine their weapon, but there was another obstacle they had to overcome. The Voron were not simply a military force, they were also a highly organized and disciplined empire. Every plan, every strategy, had to take into account the Voron's ability to adapt and learn from previous encounters. The Resistance needed a plan that was both innovative and unpredictable. They had to think beyond the limits of technology and focus on what made humanity unique: its capacity for creative problem-solving. As the Resistance continued to prepare for the next phase of the war, a new sense of urgency began to spread. The countdown was on. The Voron were getting closer, and Earth's forces were running out of time to make their final preparations. But the tension was not all-consuming. There was also a palpable sense of anticipation, as though every person involved in the effort understood the gravity of what they were about to do. This was not just a fight for survival. This was a fight to reclaim the future. In the heart of the command center, where the Resistance was coordinating its efforts, the final plan began to take shape. The next strike would not be one of direct confrontation. It would be a battle of wits, a carefully planned series of operations designed to overwhelm the Voron in ways they had not expected. The plan was audacious, but it had the potential to disrupt the Empire's entire strategy. Lieutenant Elena, who had become one of the most trusted minds in the Resistance, had devised a system to hack into the Voron's communication networks and feed them false information. The goal was to confuse and misdirect the Empire's commanders, creating chaos within their ranks. If the Resistance could make the Voron believe that Earth was still vulnerable in certain areas, they could draw their forces away from critical locations, giving humanity a chance to strike where it mattered most. Meanwhile, Captain Amir had been training specialized teams to carry out surgical strikes on the Voron's supply lines. These teams were small but highly skilled, trained to infiltrate deep behind enemy lines and cause disruption without ever being detected. Their goal was not to destroy but to delay. Every moment the Voron spent dealing with unexpected setbacks would be another moment humanity had to prepare. As the final pieces of the plan fell into place, Dr. Johnson received some unexpected news. A group of resistance scouts had uncovered a hidden Voron installation, a place where the aliens had been conducting experiments on Earth's natural resources. The implications were vast. If humanity could capture that facility and learn more about the Voron's experiments, it might provide the final key to defeating them. But it would be dangerous. The installation was heavily guarded, and the Voron were already aware of the presence of resistance forces in the area. It was a high-risk, high-reward mission, but it was exactly the kind of challenge that the Resistance needed. With the stakes higher than ever, Dr. Johnson knew that the next move was critical. The Resistance had one final shot at striking a blow to the Voron that would change the course of the war. The pressure was immense, but she could feel something else too, a sense of determination. Humanity was no longer on the defensive. It was taking the fight to the Empire. The mission was set. The Resistance had a plan, and they were ready to carry it out. The fight for Earth was about to enter its most dangerous phase, but this time, humanity was no longer the underdog. With each passing day, the Voron were beginning to realize that Earth was not the easy conquest they had believed, and as the final preparations began, it was clear that humanity would not go quietly into the night. They would fight, and they would fight to win. The early morning sky was calm, a soft orange glow stretching across the horizon. To someone not aware of what was coming, it could have been mistaken for a peaceful day. But deep beneath the surface of that quiet Earth was preparing for something far greater. The Resistance had completed its preparations. Everything was now in place. The final step of the plan would soon begin, a step that would decide whether Earth would remain free or fall under the Empire's control forever. Captain Amir stood at the edge of a makeshift command post, watching the sun rise over the hills. In his hand was a small communicator that displayed the movement of their forces across the continent. Everyone was in position. Teams were ready across every major region. From the forests in the north to the deserts in the south, Resistance cells had been activated and were awaiting his signal. This wasn't just another mission. It was the moment everything had been building toward. Inside the command center, Dr. Johnson paced back and forth, her mind racing with calculations and contingency plans. The weapon she and her team had developed was now connected to a system capable of delivering it through the aliens' disrupted energy grid. But it wasn't just about firing the device. The timing had to be perfect. The Voron systems were recovering faster than expected, and their scouts had already detected unusual patterns in Earth's energy fields. The window of opportunity was closing. Lieutenant Elena sat quietly at her console, eyes locked on the Voron's network feeds. Through weeks of work and testing, she had managed to create a temporary blind spot in the alien surveillance systems. It wouldn't last long, perhaps an hour at most, but it would be enough to send the final signal. She glanced at Maya, who was preparing to lead a small team into the captured installation found just days before. The site was filled with unfamiliar technology, some of it still active, and it might hold the last clues humanity needed to truly understand the Empire's weaknesses. As the final hour approached, a strange feeling settled over the base. It wasn't fear. It was something closer to quiet focus, like a deep breath before a leap. All around the world, people stopped what they were doing, not because they were told to, but because they could feel something was different. Resistance. Broadcasts had gone out across every channel, letting people know that the final phase was beginning. It was time for Earth to stand together. One last time. The first move was subtle. Elena sent out a signal that caused the Voron's communications to slow down. It wasn't enough to raise alarm, but it bought the resistance a few precious minutes. At the same time, Captain Amir gave the order for the distraction teams to activate. In cities still under Voran control, resistance fighters caused harmless power surges, redirected drones, and activated old satellite dishes. The goal was simple: confuse the enemy long enough to create an opening. Meanwhile, Maya and her team had entered the alien facility. The place was quiet, too quiet. Strange lights flickered on the walls, and the air was filled with a soft hum. Maya moved carefully, guiding her team past broken consoles and glowing panels. Then they found it, a chamber filled with large, clear tanks containing Earth's plant life. The Voron had been studying Earth's environment in secret. But why? Dr. Johnson received the data from the team and her eyes widened. The Voron weren't just trying to control Earth, they were trying to change it. They had been experimenting on the planet's natural systems, adjusting air chemistry and plant growth. If those experiments continued, Earth would slowly become unlivable for humans. That was the final piece of the puzzle. The Empire didn't just want to rule Earth, they wanted to reshape it entirely. The plan couldn't be delayed. Dr. Johnson gave the final order. All across the world, resistance teams began activating the energy pulse devices they had hidden near key alien structures. These devices, powered by the core Dr. Johnson's team had developed, would overload the modified energy grid and cause a feedback loop. The Voron's advanced systems, so heavily integrated into Earth's environment, couldn't handle the sudden wave of interference. One by one, alien ships began to lose control of their stabilizers. Their drones malfunctioned. Their tracking systems blinked out. The shield generators that had once protected them now began to collapse under their own weight. But this wasn't about destruction. The resistance had learned enough to control the effect. The energy wave was designed not to cause harm, but to create disconnection. The Voron's ships and command centers were left powerless, not destroyed, but removed from the fight. It gave the resistance what they needed, a clear path forward. In the hours that followed, Earth saw something it hadn't seen since the invasion began: the sky clearing of alien presence. Voron command ships, unable to communicate with one another, began to retreat. Some drifted into orbit, while others returned to deep space seeking help. On the ground, their remaining patrols were rounded up, not harmed, but simply stopped. Earth had not responded with fear or aggression. It had responded with intelligence and unity. Captain Amir stood again at the edge of the hill, watching as the last of the Voron crafts disappeared beyond the clouds. He didn't cheer. He didn't shout. He simply nodded. Earth had done the impossible, not by matching the Voron's power, but by standing together, thinking smarter, and refusing to give up. Dr. Johnson, exhausted but proud, looked at the glowing horizon and whispered, "They came to change our world. But we changed the outcome." And far above, in the silence of space, the Voron command began to understand something they hadn't before. Earth was more than a world. It was a home. And no empire, no matter how vast, could take that from those who loved it enough to protect it.